The stagecoach rattled to a halt, dust billowing around the weathered wheels as Lillian Taylor clutched her small valise and stared out at the desolate train platform in Belmont, Wyoming territory. May 1876 had brought unusually warm weather, and sweat beaded on her forehead beneath the brim of her bonnet. Her free hand instinctively moved to her stomach, still flat, but carrying a secret that had driven her from her Boston home. The baby her late fiancé Charles's child would begin showing soon enough, and no one had come to meet her. "This is it, madam." "Belmont," the driver called down, already unloading her trunk. "Someone's supposed to be meeting you," Lillian swallowed hard, scanning the empty platform. "Yes, a Mr. Harold Jensen. We corresponded about a marriage arrangement." The driver glanced around, shrugging. "Don't see no Jensen. Town's just yonder if you want to ask around." Her heart sank as she stepped down. 3 months of exchanging letters with Mr. Jensen, a shopkeeper looking for a wife, had culminated in this moment abandoned at a dusty Wyoming train platform, 5 months pregnant, and utterly alone. The letters in her reticule felt heavy now. His last correspondence had confirmed today's date for her arrival, but the platform remained empty save for the station master dozing in his chair. "I'll wait a while longer," she said, more to herself than to the driver who was already climbing back onto his seat. "Suit yourself, miss," he replied, "but I wouldn't count on him showing. Jensen cleared out of town near 2 weeks ago. Heard he ran off with a saloon girl to Montana." The words struck her like a physical blow. "What?" she whispered, sorry to be the bearer of bad news. The driver tipped his hat. "Good luck to you." With a flick of the reins, he drove away, leaving Lillian alone with her trunk and the devastating news. She sank onto her trunk, fighting tears. All her planning, all her desperation to escape the scandal in Boston before her pregnancy became visible, had led to this moment of complete abandonment. At 22 years old, unwed and with child, her options had dwindled to nothing. "Miss, you all right there?" The deep voice startled her. A tall man stood a few paces away, dusty from the trail with a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were simple but clean denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. A cowboy, by the look of him, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "I'm fine, thank you," she lied, quickly wiping at her eyes. He stepped closer, and she noticed the slight limp in his gait. "Forgive me for intruding, but you don't look fine. Were you expecting someone, Mr. Jensen?" she admitted, her voice small. "But apparently he's departed for Montana." Understanding crossed the stranger's weathered face. "Mail order bride?" he asked gently. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and she nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Name's Owen Yates," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I run the Y Cross Ranch about 5 miles outside town." "Lillian Taylor," she replied, briefly touching his hand. "From Boston." "Boston's a long way from Wyoming," he observed. "Must have been important to come all this way." She looked away. "It was." Owen seemed to understand her reluctance to elaborate. He glanced at her trunk, then back to her face. "Miss Taylor, Belmont's not the kindest place for a woman alone. Let me help you get situated at the boarding house, at least until you figure out your next steps." "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," he interrupted gently. "Truth is, I've been waiting all my life to do something worthwhile. Helping you right now seems like it qualifies." Something in his words, so simple yet profound, touched her. In that moment, with nowhere else to turn, Lillian nodded her acceptance. Owen lifted her trunk with ease despite his limp. "Mrs. Whitaker runs the boarding house. She's strict but fair. She'll give you a decent place to stay while you sort things out." As they walked toward town, Lillian sensed that this chance meeting might be more significant than she could imagine. What she didn't know was that Owen Yates had his own reasons for being at the station that day, and his own secrets to keep. Belmont was smaller than Lillian had expected. A single main street lined with wooden buildings stretched before her: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other establishments that comprised the heart of the frontier town. People moved about their business, many stopping to stare at the newcomer walking alongside Owen Yates. "Don't mind the looks," Owen said quietly. "Strangers are still something of a novelty here, especially well-dressed Eastern ladies." Lillian nodded, conscious of how her navy traveling dress, though dusty from the journey, clearly marked her as an outsider. "Is it always this intimate? Everyone seems to be watching us." Owen chuckled. "It's a small town. News travels faster than telegraph wires. By supper time, everyone will know you were meant for Jensen and got left in the lurch." "How mortifying," she murmured. "Folks here have seen worse," he assured her. "Most will be sympathetic." They approached a 2-story white clapboard house with green shutters and a neat garden. A sign reading "Whitaker Boarding House" hung by the entrance. "Best accommodations in Belmont," Owen said, setting down her trunk to open the gate. "Not that there's much competition." Before they reached the door, it swung open to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore a pristine apron over a dark dress and regarded them with curious eyes. "Owen Yates," she said, hands on her hips. "What are you doing escorting a young lady to my doorstep, Mrs. Whitaker? This is Miss Lillian Taylor from Boston. She had an arrangement with Harold Jensen that's fallen through." Understanding dawned on the woman's face. "Another one, that scoundrel." She turned kind eyes to Lillian. "Come in, dear. You must be exhausted." Lillian followed Mrs. Whitaker into a tidy parlor while Owen brought her trunk inside. "I'd like a room, please," Lillian said. "Just until I can make other arrangements." Mrs. Whitaker nodded sympathetically. "Of course. I have a lovely room upstairs with a view of the mountains." "Thank you, but I should inquire about the cost first," Lillian said, opening her reticule. "My funds are limited." This was putting it mildly. After purchasing her train ticket and setting aside money for the return journey if necessary, she had precious little left. $2 a week, including meals, Mrs. Whitaker said. "First week in advance." Lillian's heart sank. At that rate, she could stay perhaps 3 weeks before her money ran out completely. And then what? With a baby coming and no prospects, her situation was dire. "That's very reasonable," she said, counting out the coins. "I'll leave you to get settled," Owen said from the doorway. "Miss Taylor, if you need anything, my ranch is the Y Cross. Just ask anyone for directions." "Why were you at the station today, Mr. Yates?" Lillian found herself asking. "It seemed fortuitous that you appeared when you did." Something flickered across his face, hesitation, perhaps. "Just picking up some supplies that were coming in on the same coach you arrived on," he said. "Fortunate timing, I suppose." As he tipped his hat and turned to leave, Mrs. Whitaker called after him. "Owen, we're still expecting you for Sunday dinner, aren't we?" "Wouldn't miss your fried chicken for anything, Mrs. Whitaker," he replied with a smile that transformed his serious face. After he left, Mrs. Whitaker led Lillian upstairs to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window overlooked the main street, with mountains visible in the distance. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Whitaker informed her. "Rest now. You look like you need it." Alone at last, Lillian sank onto the bed, the events of the day washing over her. Her hand drifted to her stomach. "What are we going to do now?" she whispered to her unborn child. She had no family left in Boston. Her parents had died in a carriage accident 2 years earlier. When Charles, her fiancé, was killed in a factory accident before they could marry, she discovered she was carrying his child. The scandal would have been unbearable in her social circle, so the mail-order bride advertisement from Harold Jensen had seemed like providence. Now, abandoned in a strange town with no husband, no family, and no prospects, Lillian faced the most uncertain future imaginable. Yet strangely, the kind eyes of Owen Yates kept returning to her thoughts as she drifted into an exhausted sleep. The next morning, Lillian woke to the sound of activity downstairs. Quickly dressing in one of her simpler dresses, a light blue cotton with minimal embellishments, she made her way down to find Mrs. Whittaker serving breakfast to 3 men in work clothes. "Ah, there she is," Mrs. Whittaker announced. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Taylor." "Miss Taylor, these are my other boarders, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Clark, and Mr. Dawson. They work at the sawmill outside town." The men nodded politely, curious eyes taking in the newcomer. "Miss Taylor's from Boston," Mrs. Whittaker continued as she set a plate of eggs and bacon before Lillian. "She's had a bit of bad luck with that scoundrel Jensen." "Martha," the oldest of the men scolded gently, "the girl doesn't need her business broadcast." Mrs. Whittaker waved a dismissive hand. "Better she knows who her friends are right off. This town will be talking regardless." "Thank you for breakfast, Mrs. Whittaker," Lillian said, eager to change the subject. "I was hoping you might direct me to someone who might be hiring. I need to find work." The room fell silent. Mrs. Whittaker exchanged glances with the men. "What sort of work are you qualified for, dear?" she finally asked. Lillian hesitated. Her education at Miss Porter's school for young ladies had prepared her to be a gentleman's wife, not a working woman. "I can read and write well. I'm proficient in arithmetic. I can play piano and speak a little French." More silence followed. "Not much call for French or piano in Belmont," Mr. Peterson said kindly. "But the school teacher left last month to get married. Town's been looking for a replacement." Lillian brightened. "Teaching. I could do that." "You need to speak with Mayor Caldwell," Mrs. Whittaker said. "His office is next to the general store." After breakfast, Lillian made her way down the main street toward the mayor's office. The town looked different in the morning light, less intimidating but still foreign to her Eastern sensibilities. Women in practical dresses nodded to her as she passed, while men tipped their hats. Everyone seemed to know who she was already. The mayor's office was a small room attached to the general store. Mayor Caldwell himself proved to be a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and a perpetually worried expression. "Miss Taylor," he said, rising from his desk. "Word travels fast in Belmont. Sorry about your situation with Jensen." "Thank you, sir," she replied, taking the offered seat. "I'm told you might be in need of a school teacher." The mayor brightened. "Indeed we are. Miss Fletcher left us in quite a bind when she ran off with that cattle buyer. You have teaching experience." Well, I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Boston. I've tutored younger students in literature and mathematics." He looked skeptical. "Our school is a bit different from your fancy Eastern establishments. 1 room, children aged 6 to 16, about 20 in total, can be a handful." "I'm a quick learner," Lillian assured him, desperation lending conviction to her voice. "And I very much need the position." Mayor Caldwell studied her for a long moment. $30 a month with a room at the back of the schoolhouse if you want it. Term starts in 2 weeks. Relief flooded her. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor, I accept." "Good." He shuffled some papers. "There's just one matter we should address. Jensen mentioned in passing that he was bringing a bride from back east. Folks might wonder." Lillian tensed, her hand instinctively moving toward her stomach before she caught herself. "Wonder what, sir?" "Well, about your circumstances. A young, unmarried lady living alone. Some of the more traditional families might have concerns about their children's teacher." Her throat tightened. I assure you my conduct will be beyond reproach. The mayor nodded slowly. I'm sure it will, but you understand the sensibilities of a small town, if there were to be any complications. He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. If her pregnancy became known, her position would be jeopardized. I understand perfectly, she said stiffly. After finalizing the details, Lillian left the mayor's office with mixed emotions. She had secured employment, a miracle given her circumstances, but at the cost of concealing her pregnancy for as long as possible. Eventually, she would show, and then what, lost in thought, she didn't notice the approaching rider until he called her name. Miss Taylor. Looking up, she found Owen Yates atop a chestnut gelding, looking down at her with those same kind eyes that had offered her comfort yesterday. Mr. Yates, she acknowledged, forcing a smile. What brings you to town again so soon? Supplies, he said, dismounting with that slight limp she'd noticed before. And checking on you, if I'm being honest. Getting settled in all right. His directness surprised her. Yes, thank you. In fact, I've just accepted a position as Belmont's new schoolteacher. Owen's eyebrows rose. Have you now? That's excellent news. Yes, well, necessity is quite motivating, she said, then immediately regretted the hint of vulnerability in her words. I imagine it is, he replied thoughtfully. Look, Miss Taylor, I was wondering if you might join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight. Nothing improper, he added quickly. Just thought you might appreciate some company and information about Belmont. Could help with your teaching. Lillian hesitated. Dining alone with a man she barely knew would certainly raise eyebrows, potentially jeopardizing her new position before she even began. Yet something about Owen Yates made her want to accept his invitation. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time. It's no imposition, he insisted. Truth be told, I don't get to enjoy much conversation these days. Ranch work is solitary. His smile seemed genuine, and Lillian found herself nodding. All right, Mr. Yates, I accept your invitation. Owen, please, he said. I'll call for you at the boarding house at 6. 6 it is, she agreed, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake or the first good decision since arriving in Belmont. That evening, Lillian dressed with care in her best remaining dress, a dark green silk with modest lace at the collar. It had been Charles's favorite, she remembered with a pang. Pushing away the memory, she pinned up her auburn hair and descended the stairs to find Owen already waiting in the parlor, engaged in conversation with Mrs. Whittaker. He stood when she entered, and Lillian was struck by the transformation. Gone were the dusty work clothes, replaced by a clean white shirt, dark waistcoat, and polished boots. His sandy hair was combed neatly, and he'd trimmed his beard. He looked less like a rough cowboy and more like a gentleman rancher. Miss Taylor, he said, his eyes warming at the sight of her, you look lovely. Thank you, she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Yates. Mrs. Whittaker watched their exchange with obvious interest. Don't keep her out too late, Owen. Miss Taylor's had a trying journey. Yes, madam, he replied solemnly, though his eyes held a hint of amusement. The Belmont Hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in town, which wasn't saying much by Boston standards but impressive for a frontier settlement. White tablecloths covered the tables, and a small vase of wildflowers sat on each one. Several diners looked up as they entered, curiosity evident in their expressions. Word travels fast, Owen murmured as the waiter led them to a table by the window. Hope you don't mind being the subject of town gossip for a while. I suppose it's unavoidable, Lillian sighed, though I'd prefer not to provide additional fodder. Once seated, Owen ordered for them both the house specialty of steak and potatoes, with coffee to drink. As they waited, Lillian found herself studying her dinner companion more closely. "You mentioned your ranch yesterday," she prompted. "Have you lived in Belmont long?" "About 5 years now," he replied. "Came west after the war with whatever I had left." "You fought in the war between the states?" He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Union cavalry, got this limp at Gettysburg. Bullet shattered my knee." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been terrible." "Had it better than most," he said with a shrug. "At least I came home walking. Anyway, afterward I drifted west like a lot of veterans. Worked cattle drives, saved every penny. Finally had enough to buy my own place 3 years ago." "That's quite an accomplishment," Lillian said, genuinely impressed. "Still a modest spread compared to some," he admitted. 200 acres, 40 head of cattle, a few horses. Enough to keep me busy." Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Lillian realized she was ravenous the first time she'd had a true appetite since leaving Boston. "And you?" Owen asked after they'd begun eating. What brought a Boston lady to agree to marry a man she'd never met in Wyoming territory? Lillian set down her fork, considering how much to reveal. "Circumstances," she finally said. "My parents passed away 2 years ago. I was alone." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Owen seemed to sense there was more but didn't press. "I'm sorry about your parents. Being alone isn't easy for anyone, especially in unfamiliar territory." "No, it isn't," she agreed quietly. "But I'm determined to make a life here now. The teaching position is a start." "The children will be lucky to have you," Owen said. "Our last teacher was more interested in finding a husband than teaching arithmetic." "And did she find a husband, I mean?" "Oh yes, cattle buyer from Cheyenne. Swept her off her feet with promises of a big house in town. Can't blame her, really. Teaching 20 frontier children for $30 a month isn't most women's dream." Lillian smiled despite herself. "Perhaps not, but it's an honest living." "That it is," Owen agreed, his eyes lingering on her face. "You know, you're not what I expected." "And what did you expect, Mr. Yates?" "Owen," he corrected gently. "I'm not sure, someone more. Fragile, perhaps, but you've faced disappointment with remarkable composure." "Necessity again," she said. "Though I admit I had my moments of despair at the station yesterday." "Anyone would have," he assured her, "but you rallied. That speaks to your character." As the evening progressed, Lillian found herself enjoying Owen's company more than she'd anticipated. He was well-spoken for a rancher, with a dry wit that occasionally made her laugh despite her troubles. He told her about Belmont and its residents, providing insights that would indeed help her as she prepared to teach. By the time they finished their meal, darkness had fallen outside and the restaurant had mostly emptied. "I should get you back to Mrs. Whittaker's," Owen said reluctantly, "before she sends out a search party." Outside, the night air was cool, stars brilliant in the clear Wyoming sky. Owen offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Lillian took it. "I've never seen so many stars," she remarked as they walked slowly down the boardwalk. "In Boston, the city lights obscure most of them." "That's one thing we have plenty of out here," Owen said, looking up. "Stars and space." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Lillian spoke again. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Yates?" At his nod, she continued, "Yesterday, you said you'd been waiting all your life to do something worthwhile. What did you mean by that?" Owen was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "After the war, I felt purposeless. I'd survived when so many didn't. Came west hoping to find meaning, but mostly just found hard work and solitude." He glanced at her. "Helping you yesterday, it felt right, like maybe that's what I've been looking for, a chance to make a difference even in a small way." His honesty touched her deeply. "Well, I'm grateful you were there," she said. "I'm not sure what I would have done otherwise." They reached the boarding house too quickly for Lillian's liking. At the door, Owen released her arm and took a step back. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Miss Taylor." "Lillian," she offered impulsively, "if I'm to call you Owen." His smile in response warmed her more than it should have. "Lillian, then. Would you allow me to show you around Belmont tomorrow? The schoolhouse, perhaps? You should see where you'll be working." "I'd like that very much," she replied, ignoring the small voice of caution in her mind. Getting too close to anyone right now was dangerous given her secret. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, tipping his hat before turning away. Lillian watched him walk down the path, his limp barely noticeable in the darkness. Only when he had disappeared from view did she enter the boarding house, where Mrs. Whittaker was pretending not to wait up for her in the parlor. "Had a nice evening, dear?" the older woman asked innocently. "Very pleasant, thank you," Lillian replied, unwilling to provide the gossip Mrs. Whittaker clearly hoped for. "Owen's a good man," Mrs. Whittaker said, setting aside her knitting. "Been through a lot but never lost his kindness. Rare quality in these parts." Lillian paused on the stairs. "He seems so." "Good night, Mrs. Whittaker." In her room, Lillian changed into her nightgown and sat by the window, looking out at the stars Owen had spoken of. Her hand drifted to her stomach, where the smallest swell was just beginning to form beneath her clothes. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself. Allowing Owen's kindness to affect her was foolish. In a few months her condition would be impossible to hide, and then what? The teaching position would certainly be lost. Any budding friendship or anything more with Owen Yates would be destroyed by scandal. Yet she couldn't deny the comfort his presence had brought her, or the way his smile had eased the loneliness that had been her constant companion since Charles's death. Sleep came slowly that night, filled with dreams of a future she could scarcely imagine, one where she wasn't alone. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Lillian prepared for her teaching role. Owen proved to be a constant presence, showing her around Belmont as promised, introducing her to families whose children she would soon teach, and even helping her organize the small schoolhouse. The building was a simple one-room structure on the edge of town, with rows of wooden desks facing a larger desk and blackboard at the front. A pot-bellied stove stood in the corner for winter heating, and tall windows provided light. Behind the schoolhouse was the small living quarters Mayor Caldwell had mentioned, just a bedroom and sitting area with a tiny kitchen. "It's not much," Owen had said apologetically when showing her the space, "but it's private. Might be preferable to the boarding house once school starts." Lillian had agreed, though the thought of living completely alone gave her some trepidation. Still, as her pregnancy advanced, privacy would become increasingly valuable. Today, a week before classes were to begin, Owen had brought her a gift, a hand-carved nameplate for her desk that read, "Miss L. Taylor," in elegant letters. "Owen, it's beautiful," she exclaimed, running her fingers over the polished wood. "Did you make this?" He nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction. "Thought you should have something proper for your desk, first impressions and all that." "Thank you," she said sincerely. "For this and, well, everything these past weeks. Your kindness has meant more than I can express." "It's been my pleasure," he replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. "Truth is, I've enjoyed your company more than I expected to." The admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lillian knew she should pull back, maintain distance before her secret complicated matters, but she found herself unable to deny the growing connection between them. "As have I," she admitted softly. Owen took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "Lillian, I know you've only been in Belmont a short time, and I don't want to presume, but I was hoping you might consider. The schoolhouse door burst open, startling them both. Mrs. Peterson, mother of 3 school-aged children, entered with a basket over her arm. Miss Taylor. I brought those curtains I promised for the— She stopped short, taking in the scene before her. Oh, I'm interrupting. I do apologize. Not at all, Mrs. Peterson, Lillian said quickly, stepping away from Owen. Mr. Yates was just helping me prepare the classroom. The woman's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. Of course. Well, I've brought the curtains for the windows. Thought they might brighten the place up a bit. As Mrs. Peterson busied herself showing Lillian the cheerful yellow fabric she'd brought, Owen excused himself, saying he needed to return to the ranch. The moment between them had passed, and Lillian wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. Later that afternoon, as Lillian walked back to the boarding house, she encountered Dr. Franklin, Belmont's elderly physician, coming out of the general store. "Miss Taylor," he greeted her warmly. "Getting settled in all right?" "Yes, thank you, doctor," she replied. "Everyone has been very welcoming." "Good to hear." He studied her face. "You're looking a bit pale, though. Feeling well?" The question sent a jolt of anxiety through her. "Just tired from all the preparations. The schoolhouse needed quite a bit of work, doctor." Franklin nodded, though his professional gaze remained assessing. "Well, don't overdo it. And if you need anything at all, my office is just down the street." Something in his tone made Lillian wonder if he suspected her condition. As a doctor, he might recognize signs that others missed. "Thank you," she said carefully. "I'll keep that in mind." That evening, as Lillian sat in her room reviewing the lesson plans she'd created, a knock came at her door. Mrs. Whittaker stood outside, a letter in hand. "This just came for you," she said, handing over the envelope. "Ryder brought it from Cheyenne." Lillian thanked her and closed the door before examining the letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, and there was no return address. Curious, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The blood drained from her face as she read the brief message. "Miss Taylor, I know what you're hiding. So will everyone else unless you leave Belmont immediately. This is no place for women of loose morals." A concerned citizen, Lillian sank onto the bed, the letter trembling in her hands. How could anyone know about her pregnancy? She'd been so careful, wearing loosely fitted dresses and maintaining a proper demeanor at all times. Panic rose in her chest. If her secret was revealed, everything would be lost: her teaching position, her reputation, any chance of building a life here. And Owen. The thought of seeing disgust replace the warmth in his eyes was unbearable. She spent a restless night considering her options. She could leave as the letter demanded, but where would she go? Her funds were nearly depleted, and finding another position in her condition would be next to impossible. She could stay and face whatever came, but the prospect of public humiliation and rejection terrified her. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would speak with Dr. Franklin, confirm if he suspected her condition, and perhaps seek his advice. As the town's physician, he was bound by confidentiality, and she desperately needed an ally. The doctor's office was a small building next to his home, with a waiting room that was thankfully empty when Lillian arrived. Dr. Franklin himself answered her knock, looking surprised but pleased to see her. "Miss Taylor, come in, come in." She followed him into his examination room, nervously twisting her hands. "Dr. Franklin, I wondered if I might speak with you confidentially." His expression softened. "Of course, my dear. Doctor-patient confidentiality is sacred to me." Taking a deep breath, Lillian forced out the words. "I'm pregnant, about 5 months along. My fiancé died before we could marry. No one in Belmont knows, and I I received a threatening letter last night suggesting someone has discovered my condition." To his credit, Dr. Franklin showed no shock or judgment. He merely nodded thoughtfully. "I suspected as much when we spoke yesterday. The slight pallor, the way you unconsciously protect your middle when walking, nothing obvious yet but to a medical eye." "Then, others might notice soon," Lillian said, her fear confirmed. "Possibly," he agreed. "May I ask why you came to Belmont in such a condition?" "Surely there were options in Boston." Lillian explained about the mail-order bride arrangement with Jensen, how his disappearance had left her stranded. "The teaching position seemed like providence. I thought perhaps I could establish myself, save some money before I began to show, Dr." Franklin sighed heavily. "A difficult situation indeed. Small towns can be unforgiving places, especially for women. Have you considered your options?" "What options are there?" she asked bleakly. "Well," he said carefully, "you could leave before anyone else discovers your secret. Or you could stay and face the consequences, which might include losing your position. Or, she prompted when he hesitated, or you could marry quickly. A hasty marriage might raise eyebrows, but it would provide protection for both you and the child." Marriage. The word hung in the air between them. Lillian thought of Owen and the growing connection between them. Would he consider such a thing? The very idea of proposing marriage to solve her predicament seemed manipulative and dishonest. "I don't think I could deceive someone that way," she finally said. "Perhaps it needn't be deception," Dr. Franklin suggested gently. "I've seen the way Owen Yates looks at you. There's genuine feeling there." Lillian's cheeks warmed. Even if that were true, asking him to take on another man's child. "Men have done more for less reason," the doctor said. "Especially men like Owen, who know what it means to need a second chance." She left the doctor's office with her thoughts in turmoil. Marriage to Owen Yates. The idea simultaneously terrified and comforted her. In the weeks since her arrival, she'd come to respect and admire his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he spoke to everyone with the same respectful attention regardless of their station. And yes, there was an attraction there too, one that grew stronger with each meeting. But could she ask such a thing of him? And what of the threatening letter? If someone already knew her secret, would marriage even solve the problem? Lost in thought, she nearly collided with Owen himself as she turned the corner toward the boarding house. "Lillian," he exclaimed, steadying her with gentle hands. "I was just coming to find you." "Owen," she managed, her heart racing at his touch. "I'm sorry, I was distracted." His expression turned concerned. "You look troubled. Is everything all right?" She couldn't meet his eyes. "Just schoolhouse matters." "Nothing important." Owen studied her face for a moment, clearly not believing her but choosing not to press. "I see. Well, I came to invite you to dinner at my ranch tomorrow. I'd like to show you the place if you're willing." The invitation surprised her. "Your ranch? That's quite a distance, isn't it?" "I'll bring the buggy to fetch you," he said. "It's a pleasant drive this time of year." Lillian knew she should refuse. Getting closer to Owen would only make her eventual departure or disgrace more painful. Yet the thought of seeing where he lived, learning more about the life he'd built, was irresistible. "I'd like that very much," she heard herself say. His face lit up with a smile that made her heart ache. "Wonderful. I'll come for you around noon." "Noon is perfect," she agreed, pushing aside her misgivings. The next day dawned clear and warm. Lillian dressed with care in a light muslin dress that disguised her slightly thickening waist. She pinned her hair up but allowed a few curls to escape, framing her face softly. It was vanity, perhaps, but she wanted to look her best for Owen. He arrived precisely at noon, driving a smart buggy pulled by a handsome bay horse. Mrs. Whittaker watched from the porch with undisguised interest as Owen helped Lillian into the seat beside him. "You look lovely," he said quietly, his eyes appreciative as they took in her appearance. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his gaze. The drive to the Y-Cross Ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stand of cottonwoods. Owen pointed out landmarks along the way: the creek where he watered his cattle, the rocky outcropping that marked the boundary of his property, the distant mountains that provided a stunning backdrop to the prairie. "It's beautiful," Lillian said sincerely as they crested a small rise and the ranch came into view. The main house was modest but well built, a two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the homestead, all situated in a small valley protected from the harshest winds by surrounding hills. "Home sweet home," Owen said, a note of pride in his voice. "Built most of it myself, with some help from neighbors." "You've accomplished so much," Lillian marveled as he helped her down from the buggy. "Still a work in progress," he said, leading her toward the house. "But it's coming along." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and touches that spoke of Owen's personal taste: bookshelves filled with volumes on history and agriculture, a few landscape paintings on the walls, a patchwork quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair. "You have books?" Lillian exclaimed, moving toward the shelves with delight. "I didn't expect such a library out here." Owen smiled at her enthusiasm. "Reading keeps me sane during the winter months when there's not much else to do. Feel free to borrow anything that interests you." She ran her fingers along the spines, noting titles by Thoreau, Emerson, and even Shakespeare. "I may take you up on that offer." "Please do," he said, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "I'd appreciate your thoughts on them." After showing her the rest of the house, Owen led her outside to meet his ranch hand, a weathered man named Miguel who tipped his hat respectfully. Together, they showed her the barn where several horses watched curiously from their stalls, and the small garden where Owen grew vegetables for his table. "It's not much compared to what you're used to in Boston," he said as they walked back toward the house, "but it's peaceful." "It's wonderful," she said honestly. "You should be proud of what you've built here." Inside, Owen surprised her by preparing lunch himself: a simple but delicious meal of cold chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie that he admitted Mrs. Whittaker had sent along. As they ate at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows, Lillian felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. Here, miles from town and its judgments, she could almost imagine a different life, one where her circumstances didn't define her, where happiness might still be possible. "Penny for your thoughts," Owen said, breaking into her reverie. She smiled. "I was just thinking how peaceful it is here." "How?" "Right it feels." Something shifted in his expression. "I'm glad you feel that way, Lillian, because I've been wanting to talk to you about something important." Her heart quickened. "Oh," Owen set down his fork, his expression turning serious. "I know you haven't been in Belmont long, and I don't want to rush you, but I've never been one to hesitate when something matters." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I find myself thinking about you constantly. Your kindness, your determination, your smile. I know it may seem sudden, but I believe what I feel for you is real and lasting." Lillian sat frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. Was he about to propose? The very thing she'd been contemplating since her conversation with Dr. Franklin, yet now that the moment might be upon her, panic rose in her chest. How could she accept when he didn't know the truth? "Owen, please let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I just want you to know that I care for you deeply, And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would be honored to court you properly, with marriage in mind." The sincerity in his eyes nearly undid her. Tears welled up and she looked away, unable to bear the weight of his honest affection when her own situation was built on deception. "Lillian," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Have I offended you?" "No," she managed, wiping at her eyes. "No, not at all. I'm touched beyond words, truly. But there's something you don't know about me, something that might change how you feel." Owen reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." The moment of truth had arrived. Drawing a shaky breath, Lillian met his gaze. "I'm expecting a child. My fiancé died before we could marry, and I came west to escape the scandal. The mail-order bride arrangement was meant to give my baby a name, but when Jensen abandoned me..." She trailed off, unable to continue as tears overtook her. Owen's hand tightened on hers, but his expression remained unreadable. The seconds stretched painfully as Lillian waited for the disgust or disappointment she was sure would come. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle. "How far along are you?" "5 months," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "And you've been carrying this burden alone all this time?" "Yes," she admitted. "I've been so afraid of being discovered, of losing everything again. And now someone knows. I received an anonymous letter threatening to expose me if I don't leave Belmont." Owen's expression darkened. "A threatening letter? Who would do such a thing?" "I don't know," she said miserably. "But it means my time here is limited. I'll have to leave soon before I begin to show more obviously." "Leave?" Owen repeated, his brow furrowing. "Is that what you want?" The question caught her off guard. "It doesn't matter what I want. Once my condition is known, I'll lose my teaching position, my reputation. It matters to me what you want," Owen interrupted firmly. "If staying in Belmont is what you desire, then perhaps there's another solution." Lillian's heart skipped a beat. What solution could there possibly be? Owen stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. Taking both her hands in his, he looked up at her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not someday, but now. Today, tomorrow, as soon as can be arranged." "Owen, you can't." "I can," he insisted. "I know my own mind, Lillian. My feelings for you haven't changed with what you've told me. If anything, knowing how brave you've been only increases my admiration. But the baby will be mine in every way that matters," he said firmly. "I've been waiting all my life for something meaningful, Lillian, for a family of my own. I believe you and this child could be that family if you'll have me." Tears flowed freely down Lillian's cheeks now. "You would do that? Take on another man's child, face whatever gossip might come?" "In a heartbeat," Owen answered without hesitation. "I love you, Lillian Taylor. I think I've loved you since I saw you sitting alone at that train platform, looking so lost yet so determined. Let me help you carry this burden. Let me be the husband to you and father to your child that you both deserve." The words she'd longed to hear, yet never dared hope for. Lillian searched his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but found only sincerity and love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strengthening as she repeated, "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Owen stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. His embrace was gentle, mindful of her condition, yet it conveyed all the strength and protection she'd been longing for. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, a sensation Lillian had feared she would never experience again. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Once their engagement was announced, the town reacted with predictable curiosity, but largely positive support. Mrs. Whittaker took charge of wedding preparations with enthusiasm, while Mayor Caldwell assured Lillian that her teaching position remained secure. "A married woman teacher is unconventional but acceptable," he'd said with a wink. "Especially when married to one of our most respected ranchers." Dr. Franklin had been particularly pleased by the news. "A wise decision," he'd told Lillian during a discreet prenatal checkup. "Owen Yates is a good man. He'll make an excellent father." Only one shadow remained: the mysterious letter writer. Despite Owen's inquiries around town, no one admitted to sending the threatening message. Lillian tried to put it from her mind, focusing instead on her upcoming marriage and the hope it represented. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in Belmont's small church. Reverend Morris performed the ceremony, beaming at the couple as they exchanged vows before a surprisingly large gathering of townspeople. Lillian wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Whitaker had helped alter to accommodate her slightly rounded figure, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. As Owen slipped a gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, he told her, sent from his sister in Pennsylvania at his urgent request, Lillian felt a sense of wonder at how completely her life had transformed in just over a month. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Morris declared. "You may kiss your bride." Owen's kiss was tender and reverent, his hands cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Owen Yates, the applause was enthusiastic and genuine. The celebration afterward in the church hall was a community affair, with everyone contributing food, music, and well wishes. As Lillian moved among their guests, Owen's hand warm at the small of her back, she was struck by how quickly Belmont had become home, how these strangers had become friends in such a short time. It was during this celebration that Sheriff Davis approached them, his expression serious despite the festive atmosphere. "Hate to interrupt your wedding day," he said apologetically, "but I thought you should know. We found out who sent that threatening letter." Lillian tensed, and Owen's arm tightened protectively around her waist. "Who was it?" he asked. "Widow Simmons," the sheriff replied. "Caught her trying to post another one today. Seems she had her eye on you for her daughter and took exception to Miss Taylor, Mrs. Yates now stepping in." "Adelaide Simmons," Owen said incredulously. "She's hardly spoken 2 words to me in all the years I've lived here." "Some folks build up fantasies in their minds," Sheriff Davis said with a shrug. "Anyway, I've had a stern talk with her. Don't think she'll be causing any more trouble. Wanted you both to know so you could enjoy your day without worry." After he left, Owen turned to Lillian with a relieved smile. "Well, that's one mystery solved. Are you all right?" "More than all right," she assured him, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible." As evening fell, they said their goodbyes and departed for the ranch, their home now. The drive was peaceful, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky as they traveled the now familiar road. "Any regrets?" Owen asked quietly as the ranch came into view. Lillian looked at her husband's profile, illuminated by the rising moon, and felt a surge of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought him to that train platform on the day of her arrival. "Not a single one," she replied, placing her hand over his on the reins. "I came to Wyoming seeking safety and found love instead. How could I regret that?" The months that followed were filled with adjustments and preparations. Lillian continued teaching until her condition became too advanced to hide, then reluctantly took leave with the promise to return after the baby's birth. To her surprise, the school board agreed readily, with several mothers volunteering to take turns continuing the children's education in her absence. Owen proved to be a devoted husband, alternating between protective concern and awestruck wonder as Lillian's pregnancy progressed. He spent evenings reading aloud from medical texts about childbirth and infant care, built a cradle with his own hands, and even expanded the garden to include more vegetables that Dr. Franklin recommended for expectant mothers. On a snowy evening in late January 1877, after a long but uncomplicated labor attended by Dr. Franklin and Mrs. Whittaker, Lillian gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Owen, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom door throughout her labor, entered with tears in his eyes when invited to meet his son. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully taking the swaddled infant from Lillian's arms. "Absolutely perfect." As Owen held the child, his expression of wonder and love confirmed what Lillian had come to believe over the past months, that blood mattered far less than heart when it came to family. "What shall we name him?" she asked softly. Owen considered the tiny face, now peaceful in sleep. "What about Thomas? After your father?" The thoughtful suggestion brought tears to Lillian's eyes. "Thomas Owen Yates," she amended, "if that's all right with you." "More than all right," Owen agreed, his voice thick with emotion as he returned the baby to her arms and sat beside them on the bed. "It's perfect like him. Like you." As spring returned to Wyoming, bringing new growth to the ranch and the promise of a good year ahead, Lillian often found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led her to this life. What had begun as desperate escape from scandal had transformed into a journey toward genuine love and family. One warm afternoon, as she sat on the porch with 3-month-old Thomas sleeping in her arms, she watched Owen return from the fields, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He spotted her and raised his hand in greeting, quickening his pace toward her. Lillian smiled, remembering his words from that first day at the train station. He'd been waiting all his life for something worthwhile, he'd said, something meaningful. As he climbed the steps and bent to kiss her before stroking their son's downy head with a gentle finger, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly the same thing: a love worth waiting for, a family worth cherishing, and a home where she truly belonged. "Welcome home," she said softly as Owen settled beside her on the porch swing. "Best words in the English language," he replied, slipping an arm around her shoulders and drawing her close. "Especially when you say them." Together, they watched the sun sink behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, a fitting end to another day in the life they had built together, against all odds in this wild and beautiful land. In the years that followed, the Y Cross Ranch prospered under their joint care. Lillian returned to teaching part-time as Thomas grew, eventually welcoming a daughter, Emma Rose, and later twin boys, James and William, to complete their family. The threatening letter that had once caused such fear became nothing more than an amusing anecdote to share on their wedding anniversary, a reminder of how close they had come to missing the happiness they'd found together. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Owen and Lillian would often sit on that same porch swing, watching the stars emerge over Wyoming's vast horizon, marveling at how a chance meeting at a desolate train station had changed both their lives immeasurably and irrevocably for the better.